the term that shamed Africa for 500 years. But was it ever dark? In 1869, Henry Stanley, journalist who turned explorer, he needed a story that would sell papers. Lost in the jungle of Central Africa, broke, desperate, and his newspapers back in New York, they named a story, a headline, something that would sell papers. So Stanley gave them what they wanted. He didn't write, "We are exploring unknown territory." He wrote, "The Dark Continent." Dark because it was mysterious, dark because it was dangerous, dark because it would make white readers in London and in New York open their wallets. And just like that, a label was born. But here is what they didn't tell you. When Stanley called it dark, he meant unknown to Europeans. He didn't mean without civilization. He didn't mean without history. He didn't mean without light. See, by 1869, European map of Africa was a joke. So, if Africa was dark, then explain this. Year 12,000, right here in the heart of the Sahara Desert, while most of the Europeans couldn't read their own names, a city called Timbuktu had 25,000 students. 25,000, that was more students than Oxford and Cambridge combined at the time. But Timbuktu wasn't just a school, it was a university, a library, a brain of the world, astronomy. They were mapping stars and planets 300 years before Galileo. Mathematics, algebra, geometry, calculus, medicine, surgery, pharmacology, treatment that European doctors hadn't even dreamed of. Law, philosophy, poetry, theology. The Sankara University had professors from Egypt, Morocco, Spain. Students came from as far as India and China to study here. They didn't come to civilize Africa, they came to learn from Africa. One scholar, Ahmad Baba, owned a personal library of 1,600 books in the 50s. That's more books than most European kings owned in the entire palace. But then came the explorers, the civilizers, the Europeans with guns and Bibles and greed. Picture this, it's the year 1100, while London was still mud huts and wooden walls. Right here in Southern Africa, a civilization was taking 72 tons of granite. No mortar, no cement, not a single drop of glue, just stone, precision, and engineering genius. They called it Great Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe means house of stone in Shona, and it was massive. Walls 11 meters high, 5 meters thick. You could fit 3 elephants standing on top of each other. This wasn't a village, this was a city. 18,000 people lived here. Traders, craftsmen, gold miners. They traded gold, ivory, and iron with China, India, and Arabia. Now, let's go even deeper. Year 330 AD, while Rome was still debating if Jesus was real, the kingdom of Aksum in Ethiopia had already adopted Christianity as the state religion. King Ezan made that decision, making Ethiopia one of the first Christian nations on earth. Older than France, older than England, older than most of Europe. But Ethiopia didn't stop there. While Europe was burning witches at the stake, while the Europe's dark ages killed millions through plagues and ignorance, Ethiopia had hospitals, they had universities, they had written laws. The Kebra Negasta, their royal chronicle, was written in 13 AD. It detailed history, theology, and politics. Europe was still copying books by hand and calling it scholarship. So tell me, who are really lying in the darks? The empire that never got colonized, the nation that defeated Italy at the Battle of Adwa in 1896, or the continent that called itself enlightened while drowning in superstition. So let's be clear about something. Africa was never a dark continent. Africa was the continent Europe was afraid of. Africa of its gold, Africa of its knowledge, Africa of its power. So they dimmed the lights, they burned the libraries, they rewrote the maps, they took Timbuktu's manuscript and called them primitive. They saw Great Zimbabwe stones and called it mysterious. They met Ethiopia's king and called them tribal. But history isn't written by liars. History is written by those brave enough to dig it up. The universities were here, the engineers were here, the empires was here. The only thing that was dark was the story they told you. And that story ends today. Because every time you hear dark continent, remember Timbuktu, remember Zimbabwe, remember Aksum and Libela. Remember that civilization don't come to Africa. Civilization came from Africa. If this opened your eye, hit subscribe, because next week I'm showing you the African king who ruled Europe. Yes, you heard that right? African kings ruling Europe. The truth is just getting started, and it starts with you knowing who you really are.